Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching. Whether you are a surfer or maybe an aspiring surfer or carpenter, I hope you enjoy this video. This is not intended to be a tutorial or a how-to video, although you might possibly learn something from this video. I just made this for your enjoyment, to share the process of how I shape my own wooden surfboard. This was my very first surfboard ever shaped, and I decided to go for a wooden surfboard because I know a little bit about carpentry already and I have the tools, and I really enjoy looking at wooden surfboards. So here you see my blanks. These are my planks, or blanks I guess. Just 17 Cypress planks that I bought and got planed by the actual wood mill. I then outlined the stringer onto each one of those planks to remove the bulk of the material. This process took quite a while because a jigsaw doesn't cut particularly fast. I guess if you had a bandsaw it might be slightly faster, but even so it's a slow process. The idea is to get within the ballpark of the general shape and thickness, just so that the profile of the board is kind of in the ballpark. There you can see, but it's still very uneven, obviously. I then lined them all up as well as I possibly could, and then screwed them together, starting from the middle. So starting from the middle, working towards the rails or the edges of the board, I screwed them together, being careful not to screw through the side of the rail, so make sure that the length of the screw is not too long. And then once I got to the middle, I simply glued those two halves together. But I made one mistake, and that was to use too much glue for my spot gluing. When doing spot gluing, it's better to put some paper between the two halves and then glue the paper, almost sandwich the paper between the two halves. That way it's easier to break loose later on. That's too much glue, by the way. I should have used a lot less. And then the planing started. So at this stage I'm simply planing it to level it out so it's easier for me to measure the board. It's very difficult to work off an uneven surface, and you'll see that I am mainly using my hand plane for most of the shaping, and that is simply because I only have a hand plane, and also because I really enjoy using hand tools. I'm by no means a hand tool purist. You'll see me using power tools quite often actually, but I really enjoy the satisfaction you get from using a hand plane and hand tools in general. Here you can see how uneven that surface still is. This is the underside of the board. So once that is planed, it should be completely smooth. I gave myself about half a centimeter to a centimeter of leeway as far as the thickness is concerned. That way I allowed myself to shape the board the way I like it. If you cut the board initially too close to the actual shape, then you don't have that much leeway. It's easier to shave closer to the line than it is to cut to the line. Here I'm cutting out the general outline with a special length jigsaw blade, and that is the general shape of the board. The length, the width, the outline. Obviously it's still solid, so it's very heavy. You can tell I'm struggling to pick it up, and the rails haven't been done and it's still very thick. but it's starting to look like a surfboard already, and I was very chuffed at this stage, very excited. You can see I'm even working at night. So this whole process took me about 4 months to complete, from start to finish. That doesn't mean that I worked on it 24/7. Obviously, I would take half an hour here or an hour there. On weekends I might have 4 hours that I would use in one day, and in total the board came down to 93 hours. I'll write down all the interesting details like the board dimensions and the wood that I used and so on in the description below, if anyone wants to reference that later on. Here you can see me marking out the rails, and this was an extremely satisfying part of this project. I had a lot of fun doing this. I didn't want to stop once I started shaping the rails, because this is really what shaping is all about. Giving it your own personal edge, and there's a lot of subjectivity to this. You know, that you have general outlines for how you shape a board, and I did a lot of reading up about it because I don't have any experience with this, but in the end it's still just your preference. And using the hand plane worked very well in this process. It was actually very fast. I wouldn't want to use another tool if I had to do it again. The design that I have for this board is a Mini Simmons. So what I did was I used a free program online called Aku Shaper. It's basically a CAD program, and then from there I plotted photographs that I enjoyed. So I would find photographs of boards that I really liked online, and then I used those photographs as my templates for my board, and then I tweaked it in the program. So this board is basically custom designed, and I must say I got very close to the actual design that I had on the computer as well. So here you see me breaking those two halves apart again. It's supposed to just snap in two. It didn't. I had to actually cut some of it. It was a mission. Next time I'll definitely use paper between the two halves and less glue. Now once all this is done, I had 17 unique pieces that had to be hollowed out. You can see I drilled holes for each chamber. I drilled 4 holes for each chamber, and then basically just connected the holes using a jigsaw. That way you have all these cavities, normally about 5 to 4 cavities per plank, depending on the length of the plank. Some of the planks had 6 cavities. In hindsight, I didn't actually need so many little pillars. I could have made the cavities longer, maybe only had 3 little supporting pillars per plank. But you know, you only find this out afterwards. The board is very strong. Now that it's all glued up and epoxied and everything, it's actually too strong. So I could have taken off more weight. What I did to take even more weight off the board was use an angle grinder with a sanding disc on, just to remove excess wood. And it worked very well. It took quite a while, and it creates a lot of dust. Obviously you have to protect yourself from the dust. Make sure that you have a good respirator, and perhaps use something on your ears, and obviously use your glasses as well, your goggles. And here you can see what one of those sections look like after being completely grinded down. I use special epoxy. This is a boat building epoxy, so it's fine with water. It's extremely strong. It's actually stronger than the wood itself. If you had to remove the pieces, the wood would break instead of the bond. And I did 2 pieces at a time, so this took a very long time because the epoxy takes at least 24 hours to cure. This whole process took more than a week, and I only did about 2 sections per day because you want to keep the gluing process symmetrical. So I would do a piece on each side. The reason you can't do this whole process all at once is because the gluing edge is so fine that it will just move when you clamp it, and you have so many of those gluing surfaces it would be almost impossible to line up the whole thing at once. Here you can see we're getting very close to the final product. I just need to sand down the excess epoxy. I don't know why I wasn't wearing my respirator in this specific instance. And then the creative part started. I asked my wife, who is a very good artist, to help me with my design that I had in mind. So she did the outline for the design using pencil, and then I burned it on using a soldering iron. My soldering iron uses gas or butane, so it's a little different to most electrical soldering irons. I can gauge the intensity or the heat by just throttling the gas. And this was a very fun part of the project as well. I really enjoyed it, very relaxing. Had an audiobook on, and I would just sketch whenever I felt like it, mostly in the evenings. In total, this whole design took me 16 hours to burn. I must admit that this design that I made on the board was probably quite ambitious, and I could have messed it up very easily, and that would have made the board look silly. But in the end it came out amazingly. I'm very proud of how it came out. And then the part started where I had no clue what I was doing. I'd never used epoxy or fiberglass before, but I watched all the YouTube videos that I could find and read all the documentation that I could find, and I made sure that I had everything that I needed. And I still made mistakes, but it wasn't that bad. If you are wondering whether you can glass your own board or not, you definitely can. Just make sure that you have the right knowledge and the right equipment close at hand, because epoxy work has to happen quickly. There's one thing that I made a mistake on. It was not sanding between layers. So between your normal cloth coat and your hot coat, I didn't sand enough, and I actually had to do the one layer again, which was a huge slip. I don't show that in this video, but make sure that you sand well between the different layers. I also decided not to put in removable fins and rather make my own fins and glass them in. So I used Cedar Wood and made thin fins, which I then sandwiched in between 8 pieces of cloth or fiberglass and epoxy, and it worked out very well. I quite like the wooden fin look on the wood board. So I had 4 pieces or 4 layers of cloth on each side of the fins. Very important when you're working with epoxy and fiberglass, just use gloves. It makes your life so much easier because you don't have to worry about getting any unnecessary oils on your workpiece, and you don't have to worry about getting any epoxy on your hands, and you go through a lot of gloves during this process. You might wonder how I knew what shape to make the fins. Basically what I did was I just looked at what other people's fins look like online and then shaped it according to that, and also what I felt looked good. So what I did to place the fins, you might be wondering, how am I keeping them so upright while I'm glassing them? I actually super glued them to the surface in position at exactly the right angle and cant and toe in that I needed, and it worked extremely well. So here I'm busy doing the gloss coat. Isn't that just beautiful? And then because this is a hollow board, it's very important that the board can breathe. So whenever there's a change in temperature, the board has to be able to get rid of the pressure inside. So it's important that you have an air plug, and this is the process of putting in that air plug. As well as the leash plug. This is actually the cut that I had to remove and redo because I didn't sand enough on top before I put this on. And then once that was all done, I used water sandpaper or wet sanding to sand the whole board down and get it smooth. Although it looks extremely smooth when you just look at it quickly, if you run your fingers over it, it's not nearly as smooth as it could be. So I started with sandpaper at about 320 grit, and then I worked my way all the way down to 1600 grit, and then the last stage was just polishing head with polishing agent to get this final result. Now I must also tell you that I'm not actually a surfer. Before starting this whole project, I'd never even surfed yet. So this is my first surfboard as well as my first time surfing. So what you're about to see is me attempting to surf on my own creation. So please just understand that. It's my baby girl. Super impressed with Dad's work. Testing it out. And I think she is happy with the way it came out as well. I'll probably make a follow-up video of how I surf this board, let's say a year into surfing, once I can actually surf. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to share and like and subscribe and do all those things. And any comments will be answered eventually. Cheers.